So this is a unnamed anime podcast that is actually just an excuse for the two of us to talk to each other about things. My name is Kate. My pronouns are she, her.
My name is John. My pronouns are he, him, although I don't care.
Oh, I was gonna say that you're my brother. We're siblings.
Oh yeah.
That's what I was gonna say.
Wait, we know each other?
I right? What's up with that? So
We
yeah, this episode we're gonna be talking about Kara no Kyoukai, which is probably the series that I have some of the most conflicted feelings about. I haven't seen nearly as many anime as John, but it's always had a weird place for me. Like I really liked it in high school. Like the first time I watched it, I was like, "This is great." Then I watched it a couple more times, and I was like, it seems kind of less substantive than I thought." And recently, I've been like, "Man, but the aesthetic is so nice, though." Um, so that's been my
Yeah.
journey so far.
Yeah, for me, it was one of the first series that I realized I needed to rewatch. Um, I believe I first watched when I had mono. Um,
Mm.
no, that's actually not true. Um, but I watched the series and then a couple months later I went back and was thinking about it and I had forgotten most of my opinions on it. And so since then it's been about 3 years and
Mm.
now I'm rewatching it again. So it's, you know, kind of everything is coming back.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know
let's
if
real
I've had
quick.
kind of the
Oh, go ahead.
continuous experience that you've had in terms of, you know,
Yeah. Well, I definitely
up and
forgot
down,
about
up
it
and
for a
down.
while, but not for 3 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably closer to four.
Yeah. For
Um,
me, I really like Shiki, so I keep coming back to it just for her. Um,
yeah, I guess
I'm
I
like,
forgot,
man,
you know,
great
yeah, as
character,
an
great
FGO
music.
player,
That's all you need.
as an FGO player, I never like forgot that it existed or anything, because
Right.
FGO, but
Yeah, and as far as the
I'm
Nasuverse
reformed.
goes,
I'm reformed. I went
I
to
would have
FGO
to
rehab.
say FGO Anonymous. I would have to say out of all the Nasuverse works that I've read, I
It's Masters Anonymous.
oh okay. I probably prefer Kara no Kyokai out of all of them. I've never been a huge Fate fan. Like I think the nice thing about Dakkyo as it's commonly abbreviated to, maybe not in English speaking spaces, but the nice thing about it is that at least for me, it feels like it's not quite as long-winded or like I don't want to say bloated, but I think you know what I mean when I say it's not quite as suited to like long wiki articles as the other parts of
Yeah,
the Nasuverse. And that's kind of an appeal
yeah.
for me.
I think it being a movie series especially
Oh, absolutely,
helps with
yeah.
that.
Especially because, yeah,
Um,
like compared to TV anime, it's a lot easier to watch and to really appreciate, like,
yeah, and like the only way that you can consume Tsukihime is in, you know, by spending
visual
40
novel
plus
format.
hours with the visual novel.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Um,
And along with being shorter, what it also means is that the animation budget, so to speak, is not spread as thin. Um,
yep.
not that it's something that you spread necessarily, but movies tend to get made better than TV anime.
The
Anyway,
garden of budget.
yeah.
Um,
Without further delay, let's talk about the first movie for a bit. Ah,
let's.
yeah,
Yeah.
Fukan Fuke. My first impressions, well, my first like, so on my most recent rewatch, my like biggest takeaway first impression type thing is that it really does feel like a like first thing that someone made, but it doesn't feel like the first movie in a series, or it doesn't feel like it should be anyway.
Yeah, we very much had the same impression throughout watching the first one. I for one, I don't remember my initial first impressions with the series.
It's fair enough.
So the only first impressions that I can really remember, reliably anyways, are the ones that I'm making right now. Um, but yeah, it feels way too disconnected and clumsy to be the entry to a series like this.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it feels like an attempt at like a cool like in media res, like, oh, we're gonna start the story here. But there, and I hate to say it doesn't feel like there's much thought to the decision because I'm sure
I
there
mean, I
was
think we
some,
both
but
came away with that impression,
yeah, that's
like
yeah,
that
yeah. I don't
Fukan
want to
is
attribute,
almost
you
hasty
know,
and not, you know.
yeah, like I don't want to attribute some kind of like mind, or I don't want to pretend that I can read the mind of the author or whatever. But that's certainly that's what seems to come across in the work.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I mean, you know, I can't speak for 5, 6, 7 and Mirai Fukun, but like I personally found the exposition and the dialogue in the first one to be like the most intolerable and, you know, wordy, and I think in an entry to a series that's pretty,
Yeah,
it's
it's a bit
almost
of a
a nail in a
cardinal
coffin.
sin, especially
Yeah.
because it's not crucial exposition. It's exposition for what
Yeah,
is
it's just
ultimately
kind of,
like an aside, like a vignette, which is,
yeah.
you know, on the one hand, it makes sense to do an in media res for something that doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, like, you know, people will point to like Full Metal Alchemist, like, hey, they did a thing where, you know, they have like something that doesn't ultimately matter to the rest of the series in the beginning, but they didn't spend much time expositing about the things that don't matter, right? Not that, you know, hardcore Kara no Kyokai fans will be like, hey, like, her story is so important, Fujio Kirie, she's one of the four demon families. Um, so, you know, like, obviously there's stuff there, but I think, like, to the extent that it matters, it's not clear to the
I don't
viewer
think it
because it's
mattering in the
first, right?
plot.
It's
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't think it
it's hard
mattering
to
in the
get the
plot
sense of it
means
being
anything
impactful.
as an introduction to the series because you don't really know anything about the plot yet. And it's
Yeah,
not a good introduction to the plot, despite being
yeah.
kind of an important part of it. Um, like, I mean, we had talked about this before, but like the characters in um, wow, my brain just breaks.
Overlooking you.
The characters in Fukanfuke,
Yeah.
um, like just they feel the least decipher. I mean, not decipherable, but the least kind of whole. I mean, we talked about how they're for like the two of us think that the third one is should be the proper introduction to the series. Um, should be how the series starts because the characters are mostly themselves.
Yeah,
Um,
add another suggested
and
watch order. The Nasuverse needs more.
exactly. Like the characters in the first one in Fukan Fuke are just so in flux almost
Yeah, it's hard to pin
that
them
it
down for sure. If you're coming
yeah
to it for the
and
first time and you're like, who are these people? What's
and
up? Like
especially with all
especially
the
Shiki
dialogue.
because she only spends
Yeah.
like the first like 20 minutes as her like the self that you get to know her as in
It feels like she legit spends half the movie just like standing against the railing in Toko's office, just like looking
not
off
quite.
into the
I mean,
distance.
for me at
I
least,
mean,
the big impression is that she spends a lot of her time not pining but missing
yeah,
Kokuto. And the problem with
Mikia.
that is that yeah, it's hard to tell that that's what she's doing if it's your first time through because it's
Yeah.
not clear what the significance is of, for example, of well, I actually kind of like what they do with the answering machine, but you know, I mean, the fact that you've never seen Mikia before and he doesn't have any speaking lines and he's just like sitting in the sofa like half dead, it's weird because you know, for the introduction to a series, it's weird that that's the first you see of him because it's like, hey, you know, like uh, we don't know anything about this guy. He only wakes up at the end of the movie. What's going on?
Yeah, I also personally really like the answering machine, but that feels like something more to hammer home a point that you're already familiar with than
Yeah,
to
exactly.
introduce
And
like,
this is
hey,
something that
she's in
I've
love with Mikia. This is, or
yeah,
she's not in love, but
her feelings are turning. Yeah,
Mikia,
this is something that I
yeah,
brought up
precisely.
in when we watched it together. Like, I feel like the scene where she like walks home in the rain, or the scene where she like runs out of her apartment to the building in order because she like decides that she has to save him. Those could be really powerful scenes, and if, the music seems to imply that that's what they wanted. That's the direction they wanted it to go in. But I distinctly remember that like the first like three times I watched the movie, it just didn't land for me because it doesn't have the context that it needs. Like,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean,
it's like a major turning point in this in you know the first because it's the fourth chronologically of the first four movies. It's a major turning point in her character's like whole arc, and it's just like in the first movie with very little context. It you know, yeah, for me at least, I can say it just doesn't seem to land.
yeah, maybe for me, I don't remember it because it didn't land, but I also don't remember a lot. So,
Yeah, I can real
uh,
quick pull it up if you want to see exactly what I'm talking about,
oh
but
no, I,
you
I
can
I
imagine.
remember it
Okay,
from
yeah, yeah,
watching it recently, but yeah, what I mean is
yeah.
I
Right,
have
right, right.
no, I don't have a frame of reference like you have from the first time I watched it. Um,
Yeah, well, it's not that I remember the first time I watched it so much as I remember picking up on it and
yeah,
realizing that I
and just
hadn't.
not being,
Yeah,
okay.
right. So, on like my fourth watch or whatever, I was like, whoa, like, wait, this scene's super important. How did I not notice that until now? And that's what's stuck in my memory.
Yeah. Okay. I can
Yeah,
I can actually agree with that pretty wholeheartedly. Like even if I did forget it, like I also just remembered not remembering it. That doesn't make any sense. But I remember though watching it, I was like, oh, okay, wait, oh, maybe that is because I just forgot it. But
yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, the other big thing about this movie, in terms of the runtime, is that a lot of time is spent on Toko monologues, and even if it's not monologues, just discussions about.
yeah,
I hate to say philosophical. As someone who has taken philosophy classes, it kind of pains me to call it that. But like it's kind of there a little
they're
bit.
thinking.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like philosophical and psychological are the two like most overused words in the anime community. Um,
Yeah.
as someone who takes like my major covers both of those things, please stop.
But
But
it's
yeah,
so
I mean,
philosophical.
so yeah, so suicide, right? There's definitely like there's a logical thrust to what Tooko says. It is kind of ruined in the English translation, so I think for a lot of people, um, there's basically one of two outcomes. Either you get totally fucking confused because seriously, the translations that I've seen are all nonsense, or you decide that it's worthless because it's nonsense. Or sorry, you get
Yeah,
totally
like
confused and therefore decide that it must make sense and you just don't get it. Or you decide that it's worthless and
yeah, your
you
eyes
know,
glaze over and you're just like, okay.
yeah, I think, as someone who has, a pretty good understanding of Japanese, and I took some time to really make sure that I was, like, I transcribed that scene and made sure that I understood every bit of it, uh, it's fine. And so to be clear about what scene we're talking about,
Yeah,
I
I
think we should
remember
just sort
the
of
other scenes being a little worse translated than the specific one that I think you're talking about.
yeah, so there's a couple. The first one is the one where she's the first.
Like it's not
Okay, so
right, but it's
the one I'm talking about right now is the one where she's talking about leaving a suicide note or not. When it's like, oh,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah, the one that we talked about the most when we watched.
yeah, and Shiki is like,
Yeah.
oh, so it's inconsistent with like suicide by jumping. Like I see, so that's what you're saying. So it must not have been of their own will because otherwise, like whatever. Um, there's definitely again there's a logical thrust to it. It makes sense in Japanese. I don't think that like I think it's a bit of a leap. Um, no pun intended. But it makes sense, right? And just to paraphrase her argument, if you haven't, well, I don't know why you're watching this if you haven't seen the movies, but just to paraphrase her argument, she basically is like, well, there's all these girls who are jumping off this building. They're not leaving suicide notes or anything. They don't have. There doesn't seem to be any apparent motive. Um, you know, why are they doing it? Well, she says that not leaving a note means that like you don't care about your input being left behind. You don't care about like being able to broadcast your opinion or anything. You just like want to straightforwardly die. But then she says, well, when you jump off of a building in a place where people are likely to find you, the circumstances themselves are like a suicide note. And she says that because of that like contradiction, that therefore it must not have been intentional, which I think is like it's just kind of bullshitting, right? Like it
Yeah.
obviously does not constitute any kind of like proof.
Like you
It's
could
definitely
talk
like a
yourself into
Sherlock
that.
level jump
Yeah.
where it's like, okay, uh, it's a stretch.
Yeah.
But
It's the
it
kind
does
of
make
logic
sense
that
at
you could
least.
talk
It's not
yourself
total
into.
nonsense, which the English translation is. So, I can live with it. And the whole movie is like that for me, where it's like, yeah, I mean, sure, I guess.
I think Nasu
And
is
the
always
problem
like
with
that
that
for me.
is, sorry?
Nasu is always like that for me in terms of, how he presents logic.
Yeah, and I would say the problem with that is that it doesn't really leave room for theme. Um, rather than exploring an interesting question, it's sort of like a plot device. It's like a way for them to complete the investigation and figure out what's going on. So
Yeah.
even though it seems to be like, musings on like the nature of suicide, there isn't really much of that, to be honest.
Well, they
That's
muse
saved
and then
for
they
the
come
end.
to an answer, and then they stop musing.
Yeah, they saved the musing mostly for the end, like with Mikia's conversation about whether he would kill himself if he had a virus, and the after credits scene with Tooko being like, suicide there's no reason, um, which I mean, to my mind, like Toko, obviously it's one line, so it wouldn't really be fair to call it shallow. The conversation with Mikia is interesting, but it doesn't really reflect anything that's like expressed in the movie. It's just kind of a thing that exists on its own. Um, like it's not like, well, actually, I don't know. Maybe I need to work out my thoughts on this a little bit more. Because basically the point that he makes is that suicide is a moment of weakness versus a lifetime of strength. Which, I mean, all right, I guess, man. um, but like, yeah, like I don't know how much that applies considering that all of the girls that committed suicide, like at least supposedly were, either coerced or hypnotized, suggested into doing it by Kirie and or Fujuo, I guess I should say. And she herself kills herself like as a way of like feeling alive one last time. So like I don't know, it doesn't seem relevant to me.
Yeah. It just feels like a lot of kind of unconnected or disconnected musings.
Yeah, and I don't mind disconnected musings if they're like individually strong, but it definitely contributes to the movie not feeling like
Yeah.
a cohesive package for sure. Anyway, we can talk more about the individual details of the movie, but that's I think, would you say you're satisfied with that as a rough,
Yeah.
like that's roughly how we feel about the first movie. Now the second one, uh Satsujin, I forget the second word actually. Murder
Kosatsu.
speculation. Kosatsu, yeah. I was thinking keisatsu and I was like, that's police, that's not right. It's kosatsu, yeah, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
assassination police.
Yeah. Um, Kosatsu, not a word that I commonly encounter, but anyway, yeah, way more boring than I had remembered. I think it is extremely slow paced and it kind of bogs itself down with like exposition. Visual exposition to its credit, but nonetheless, it's kind of just like telling the backstory. There's good parts of it, but
Yeah. It's I mean, I just remember the scene where they're in the road. And granted, it's you know, maybe the most important scene in the movie. Um,
you're talking
but
about the opening scene
um,
with the snow.
no, no, no. Well,
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
we
with
could
the
talk
car,
about that
the
too.
end,
Uh,
the end
Yeah,
scene.
the
Yeah,
end
yeah, yeah.
right before she gets hit by the
Yeah,
car.
dude, it
When
lasts so long.
like
Oh
I
my
remember just
god.
looking at you and then looking back and it hadn't cut, and then I would
Yeah,
look at
it,
you
it
again and
lasted
look
about
back and
three
it
times
still
as long
hadn't
as I thought
cut.
it would.
Like each
I couldn't
frame
count it right now
was like
actually.
30 seconds. Yeah, it was pretty, or 20 seconds, but that's still a ridiculously long time. Uh, it didn't feel super egregious. I mean, it was slow, but it didn't feel too egregious until that scene for me. Um,
Yeah, I can agree. I think that scene is when I was like, hello?
yeah, that was pretty.
Oh, it zooms in throughout the shot. Yeah, I didn't notice. All right, let's see.
It's not static, so we can
Yeah.
have it for as long as we want.
12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah, I remember counting during the movie, and like it got to the point where I stopped counting because like I just got bored counting.
The shot is like exactly 30 seconds long. Holy shit. That's crazy.
Yikes! Wow.
Yeah, so
20 is pretty bad.
it's the shot where Shiki is kneeling on him, or I guess she's not kneeling on him, but like around over him. Like
She's
her knees are not on him, but yeah,
she's like she's on her hands and knees. With her
yeah, well,
knees
she's holding a
on
knife against his
Mika.
neck in the road.
Okay,
It's right before
one
she gets
hand.
hit by the car. Yeah, 30 seconds is a bit long for that.
A bit.
Um, yeah. it
I mean, I think there's also so many more ways to drive home, like the types of emotions and ideas that you would want to drive home in that scene, other than just leaving a wide shot for 30 seconds. Like,
yeah, yeah. I mean, like I'm all for
like
the like bold
they do
decisions,
close-ups
but
and
it
stuff,
didn't.
but like, yeah,
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 it didn't really
it
work
does
for
not
me.
pay off.
Um, but as far as the rest of the movie goes, there are definitely good parts. Shiki is, as always, a treasure. Especially, I often like to say bokushiki, but it's ore. So I don't know why I think that in my brain. Um, but male
Blame
shiki
Dr.
is great, as always. I must say it's definitely still a little confusing to me, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure like there's people who have written wiki articles about like, oh, like this is at every moment in every movie, this is which Shiki is in control. I mean, really it would just be the second one because male Shiki is not there at any other point.
Yeah,
But like at least for me, it's not super clear. Like I think I more or less have it figured out, but it's not super clear like when each one is in control, except for the speaking scenes.
it,
In the speaking scenes, it's really obvious, and I think it's
yeah,
supposed to be a little bit unclear. Like I think that's part of the character, and it's part of, you know, like if they made it like really obvious, then it would just be like a weird like anime character with switching things. But the whole point is that they're very similar to one another and hard to tell apart. So I kind of get it, but I don't know. Hmm, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. I'm thinking about it.
yeah. I mean, the only time that it's really a thing is in two, um,
Yeah. I think that the
and
main reason why it bugs me
I
is
don't
because
think,
it's just very difficult to tell in the scenes like which one of them is taking the night walks then finding the bodies. Because
yeah, I don't,
I always
my
thought it was
perspective,
female Shiki, but then like why would she lose her memories of whether or not she did it, right? So it's a little weird.
yeah, my perspective is that it's like you kind of don't need to know for sure. Like,
Yeah,
the
that's
confusion,
fair.
I think, you know, works. Like considering
Yeah, actually I can agree with that
the confusion that
100%.
Shiki's kind of experiencing, um, I think it works to convey it not just in pure black and white, and in really delineated terms.
Yeah, if
But
it was something that you could, that's actually pretty fair. If it was something that you could just easily figure out, then it would definitely like kind of trivialize the struggle of both characters of figuring out what to do. Like the fact that they're both
yeah,
that apparently, at least as far as I can tell, like Shiki is herself unaware even at the time whether she is the one committing the murders, which is pretty crazy.
that seems to be
Yeah,
the
that's
impression.
never how I thought of it before, but on the most recent watching, that does seem to be the case.
Yeah,
Um, which definitely helps explain her behavior a lot more. Like before, I thought she was just like I was like, why is she so obsessed with this idea of herself as a murderer? Like,
it's
if
just an
she's just
adulter.
not doing the murders. Yeah, exactly. It was like, huh? But yeah, I think the interpretation that she herself actually does not know is a good one. I think it's just
I mean, I the
the
one
thing
thing I
about
remember from the first
mm,
time I watched was watching the second one and being like, "Oh, she's a murderer. She's like a serial killer. Cool."
yeah,
Um,
I think
like that's
the
interesting. I've never
confusion
seen.
from the perspective of someone who's doing a somewhat close reading of it and trying to figure it out, I think you're right that the confusion works to be a mirror of both her and Kokuto's confusion. The problem is, I think on a first watching, it's just far too easy to come to the conclusion that she like
Yeah,
is or is not doing it, and is perfectly aware of that. Like there isn't much in the movie to directly suggest to the viewer that she doesn't know whether she's the one doing it. Like you can come to the like because you can logically like once you know the characters you can be like, oh okay, yeah, it would be weird for her to push Kokuto away like this if she knew that she wasn't the murderer, so she must not, right? She must be unsure. But if you don't know the characters at all, you might be like, oh, so she's not the murderer, but she has this like weird obsession with looking like one, and that like that's just like you come away with that image of her as a character. So like the inference is possible, but you don't necessarily have enough information if it's your first time viewing. So I do kind of wish that there was a little bit, it was a little clearer, like that. Yeah,
yeah. Maybe maybe the pacing leads to that. I don't know.
yeah. And in any case, I mean, I don't really care that much to be perfectly honest about the plot specifically, just because it gets dropped in the later movies. I mean drops like like drop the
reveal.
ball, not that they don't tie
Oh,
off the plot, but I mean, I don't feel that it was handled well enough for me to care that much. If I really liked where it went, I'd be like, man, it sucks that the setup wasn't great, but whatever. What really
yeah,
gets
I
me
don't
more
remember
is just the
seven,
pacing
so
of the movie, because yeah, it's very slow.
yeah, like for me that level of pacing just kind of kills um, anything you're trying to do. Um,
Yeah.
Mostly because I get bored really easily. Um, but
And the thing is, like, there are good scenes that are paced well. It's just like there's so
the,
many other scenes
yeah, the
that, like,
movie as a
every
whole is
shot
just
lingers,
filled
and
with
it's like,
so
come on,
many.
man. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, just speed it up a little bit.
I yeah, I
It
mean,
also,
I even think some of the quicker scenes like make it worse because then you're like, oh God, it's
I,
slow again,
yeah,
and it's like
that's
it
fair.
feels even slower.
Yeah,
Not that it
um,
would have been better if everything had been the same pace, but
yeah. I mean, it's also the first appearance of Singing in the Rain.
oh yeah.
Yeah, which is I'm a
Do we
little
want to talk
conflicted
about
about
that?
it. I mean, I think it's for a
Same.
Japanese audience, I think it's a lot less weird. Like,
Yeah. Yep.
for sure. And like I think especially if you've seen it a couple times, especially if you've watched a lot of anime, it's very easy to forgive the like English singing. Not that I don't really like the term English actually, but
I
like
mean, who
he's
cares?
singing in
Like
a
it's a
little bit of
Japanese
broken
character
English.
singing
Yeah,
an English
exactly
song,
right. So
right?
it's perfectly believable. It's just a little awkward, and I think that part of that awkwardness is definitely from being an English speaker and hearing someone like sing in an accent,
For
but
me,
also like it's also just weird. Like
yeah,
it doesn't really fit.
it's just weird. Like I, I don't want to like go into there's all these Hollywood songs that you could use that like have more ties to like dark undertones or like the kind of undertones that Kara no Kyoukai is trying to convey. But like it feels so like, and I believe in tone shifts. I believe in not having like universal monotone. Um, but it's kind of jarring,
Yeah, well, I
right?
think part of it is because the
Especially
series
especially
does actually maintain a very, very steady tone, other than that song.
yeah,
And in
yeah, and then
particular the soundtrack, right? Like the soundtrack is it's not
that's what
samey
I
or
mean.
anything like
That's what I
that, but
mean.
it's very
It's like
cohesive. And then
You go from
yeah,
Kaji to Yuki to like, and it's like, this, does this, like, I mean, I remember asking myself repeatedly, does this work? Like, and I'm not entirely sure still. Um,
yeah, because the soundtrack, the Kajiro Yuki soundtrack is so good, and it's so atmospheric. Like I don't know that there's room necessarily as the movies are for like just like kind of a pop song. Like I don't know the song that well other than how it is in the movies, but yeah, I think
yeah,
part of
I
it
mean,
is maybe like they just have it seems to me at least like something that would be included like at the behest of the author. Like I would imagine that
yeah,
I would imagine that like Kokuto liking the song is like something that's in the novels. Um, and I think maybe like that stems from like Natsu just having a different interpretation of the song than
for the record,
like what we
neither of us
would.
have read the novels, by the way.
Yeah, no, I've not, and I don't plan to. It would be interesting if I really
Neither.
wanted to dive deep into these movies, but I wouldn't expect to enjoy it. So I mean, whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's plenty of other things that I would rather deep dive.
yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
yeah, so what I was
yeah,
saying
for
is
me, oh,
I
sorry, go
think
ahead.
Natsu probably has a different interpretation, and this is getting really into the like mind ready. So maybe this is stupid, but I feel like it seems like the idea is that the song I'm singing in the rain, like it's supposed to be like at least for me a very upbeat song. Like it's supposed to be like very upbeat despite like dark clouds and rain.
Yeah,
But it seems like its usage is trying to be almost the opposite, or not quite almost the opposite, but like I think the reason why it doesn't fit is because it's not a song that's about like happiness and sadness. It's just like exclusively upbeat, at least to my ears and to
yeah.
like my reading of the lyrics.
I gotta say, I imagined um, Mikia with a dumb Gene Kelly smile on his face in a sailor uniform multiple times. Um, did it make the movie better? I don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, like I agree. I think there's plenty of other songs that kind of fit the duality of the series better. Um, maybe what Nasu was going for, if indeed this scene was written the way it was in the novels, maybe what he was going for was, you know, like a universally upbeat song to imply like, like negative space type of thing. Um,
Mm.
like by being super upbeat, you kind of imply the opposite, but I think that's just getting a little too cute. Um, especially just given the way the scene plays out. Does that make sense?
Uh, yeah. I mean,
Like, do you
I
know what I
think
mean?
music is one of the things I'm like least equipped to talk about, but I
Oh,
can
same.
agree more
I'm
or
I'm
less.
significantly less equipped than you are.
Oh, I well,
I
I
mean,
doubt
hey,
that's
you did
meaningful because
sound.
we're just not very
Yeah.
it was like technical sound. Like there's no music theory or anything.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you could also at least talk about music theory. I like couldn't even try.
Well,
Mid
I
middle
wouldn't try
C.
either. Anyway, yeah, let's use this as a point to move on. So the third movie, the rightful first movie in the series. You heard it here first.
Amen, brother.
The new watch order is 3, 2, 4, 1. Write that down, folks. If you
Yep.
haven't seen the series yet, watch it in that
Grab a
order.
pen. Grab paper. Notes on your iPhone
um,
don't exist.
yeah, it's pretty self-contained and it's more or less completely like nicely paced. There are some like there's a
And
couple
the
of scenes
characters
where
are
there's some
presented in a
monologuing,
way that you can
but yeah,
you can infer things from them without
the
knowing
characters
anything about them
are
beforehand.
relatively static until the end, and they do things that are very characteristic for them, or at least like like Shiki doesn't necessarily act like herself in the sense that like as the series goes on, like maybe you'd figure out that it's like, oh, it's kind of an act. Like she's trying to like live up to male Shiki a little bit. Like, like there's all these interesting things about her character, but more or less, the first impression you're supposed to have of her is the way that she is in the third movie. So, you know, right? Like, it just seems to make
Yeah.
sense. The other thing is that it's a relatively self-contained story. The movie, like, I think a big part of the reason why I think it should go first is just because the movie is better than one, like from a pacing
Yeah.
perspective and
I mean,
from
it's
like
very
a
similar to one in the sense that it's its own episodic, with tie-ins to the
yeah.
overarching plot, but
The
it doesn't
difference I
need
would say
like
is
it
that
doesn't rely
it's
on those tie-ins.
yeah. I think the difference is that it just like progresses much more like a thriller or a mystery. Like the first movie, it just is hard to follow like what's going on because it's basically just like she walks back and forth from the building and talks to Toko until she decides to kill the ghost and then she does. So it's like,
Yeah.
eh. Whereas in three, it's like, we gotta find her. Like she's trying to find a guy. We're trying to find the guy first, and then like we have to try and stop her or save her, and we're not sure
Yeah.
which. And so it's like it has a well structured like thriller to it. Um, that like in my opinion, it just works. It's not like super ambitious, and it doesn't need to be like it.
Yep.
Um,
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think um, the the way they present her powers just makes it infinitely easier to kind of grasp them and figure out
Absolutely.
what's
Also,
going
she
on in the
explains her
third one and in the
powers.
first one. Yeah,
Yeah.
precisely.
Oh, when you said her, I thought you meant Fujino. But yeah. Well, the other thing is, I actually think, yeah, like the movie as a whole is just better suited for an introduction to like the magical part of the series.
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
like
even kind of the dark tone of the series, I think
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's a little more black and white in the way it presents it, so you can be like, oh, okay, this is what this is,
yeah.
rather than
Before
one
diving
which
into
is like,
something
what
that's
is
like
this?
really just
And
like
then you have to
waffling
watch
everywhere.
two, and you're like, okay, well, like once you watch two, you've figured out what it is tonally. Um,
Yeah,
but if it started at three, I think that wouldn't be an issue at all.
yeah. That's fair. And I think going
It
back to
sets
what I
the
was saying
tone
about
very
the
well.
magic, yeah, like I think a big part of why three would be better for like people who are new to the Natsuverse is the whole like thing with magical eyes. Like if you're not used to that, I feel like
Yeah,
if you just watched the first movie, you might not even pick up on the fact that her powers were based in her eyes. Like, because, I mean, yeah, if you watch a lot of anime, you're going to notice that her eyes changed. But, like, are you really going to, like, pick up on that just as a general viewer when, like, it's, like, one shot? and then like her point of view like has these weird lines. Like I wouldn't, you know, it's like one shot where you see the lines of death. We're talking about the first movie now. It's like a, you know, you see her eyes change, and then it's like one shot of what she sees with the lines of death, and then it's just like an action scene,
And then
and
a
it's
shot
not a
of
very
her
well
cutting,
choreographed one
not
either.
on the lines.
Yeah,
Like
that too,
it's a
right?
shot
Yeah,
of the
it's
lines, and the lines are like across the torso, and then like
yeah.
you see a shot of her slicing through, and she's like slicing through the head, and it's like, okay,
Yeah, I
that's
mean, I don't
works.
mind that, but yeah, it does make it a little bit harder to figure out what's going
Yeah,
on if that's like your first exposure to it. Three, on the other hand, three has another character with a more straightforward magical eye power that is
yeah,
like shown throughout the movie, and you have time to figure out what's going on. And then at the end,
and
she is
they've
like, I
used
have
that
magical eyes
almost.
too, and then she
Yeah,
explains how they work, and then she uses them. So it's like, you know, it would be a very
yeah,
easy and straightforward way to like build up an understanding of how the magic system works.
yeah. I
Um,
don't have a problem with the, show the lines on the body and then slice the head from the first one if like you already have an understanding. But if like that's the first time you ever see her power, like it's
yeah.
it's pretty lacking.
And the fourth movie also does a pretty good job. I mean, the fourth movie would
Like
never
there's
be
so,
first, but it does a pretty good job also
yeah,
of showing how the power works.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think the fourth movie is better for like you kind of see her power and she explains her power and then Toko comes in and is like, "All right, like here's some like more details specifically about this power."
right.
Um,
Yeah. Other things about the third movie. I like the action scene better. Like it's less of. I mean, the action scene in the first movie is kind of a very low bar to 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 clear, unfortunately.
yeah.
But you know, it's basically just like they're ghosts, so they're floating, so their position is kind of whatever. The camera is not really consistently placed, and she's just kind of running across a
By
rooftop
which
stabbing
by which
ghosts.
she means the camera just spins around.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Whereas in the
It
third, it's
spins
like
around
there's
in space.
like for one thing, there's only like two people fighting, so it's a little bit, you know, like there's not, it's not going to be hard to follow in that sense. And for another, like the I guess storyboarding would be what it is. Like the progression of shots just like communicates the movement a lot better. Um,
Yeah.
you know, like the bridge
I mean,
as a setting is
it's
definitely
also
not
easier to
that
communicate,
comprehensible.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because like, you know, she like jumps through, and I mean, I don't know. I guess there's like scenes, there's like establishing shots of like the tunnels that they go through, but you know, it just they just kind of end up in wherever, which is fine. It's also not clear to me how Shiki got back to Fujino after the bridge collapsed. Like, wouldn't they be kind of stranded from each other? But it doesn't matter, right? Like, ultimately, the action scene basically works, and the music is good. Um, yeah, that's another thing that I like about it, and just the pacing overall.
Yeah. I wish I remembered more specifically that I could talk about the visual pacing. Um, I just
Yeah, well, I remember the one thing that I brought up the first time we saw it is the flashback scene where Fujino explains her insensitivity to pain. Um,
Yeah, it's just
like that's a scene.
it's just well
Yeah,
placed.
from this
Like,
series, I would expect it to be a lot worse, but it actually like it
yeah,
just flows well. Like it's quick.
from Nasu's first series, you would expect like,
Yeah, well, maybe you know maybe it was a lot more long-winded in the books.
that's fair.
But it's hard to
Well,
tell
but I
because
mean,
it ends on
it's
her
less it being
narrating it into a
long-winded.
phone. That would have been the same in the novels, you would imagine. So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
well, I mean, what I'm talking about is placing rather than like
oh,
the,
I see. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, because like I mean, I'm sure you have this problem as well with like shonen battle manga where it's just like, all right, flashback time, like right in the middle
Yeah.
of the fight, he's about to throw the big punch, flashback time, and it's like, okay. And
Yeah,
then in
the
the
flashback being
in the
placed
moment that
like
it takes for the fist to go from 3 inches in front of the face to hitting the face, like this character like remembers their whole like upbringing, and we see their whole upbringing in like real time. And it's
yeah.
like, whereas the flashback is literally is just Fujino explaining over the phone, and we
Yeah, well, and
see it.
it's right after a minor fight. It's like the first time that
Yeah,
she
they like
is
cut
like,
into the blood like a little cheesy, um,
yeah,
but it's placed. It's not orphaned
yeah, exactly, exactly,
like
yeah.
every other flashback is.
And yeah, and what I was talking about is the visual pacing, like the craft of it, you know, the movie making aspect of the pacing, which, you know,
Yeah, I
like
was
talking about the
trying to
same
talk about
scene.
that, but I don't remember enough
Yeah, which is
to
fair.
really
But
get
like
into it.
talking about the same scene as an example, right? Like it goes straight from an action scene to like narration as it like I guess pans into the blood. Um, and then there's a flashback which is like kept relatively short. Um, and then it transitions into like the same narration, but now it's her speaking into a phone, and then that the other end of that phone is like what's his name, the rapist guy, listening, which is the next scene. So it flows perfectly into the next scene. Like it doesn't take too much time. Like it doesn't it's not jarring. Like it just flows. It works.
Yep.
I appreciated that. I would say out of the
I'm
first four
curious if that's
movies,
more of a visual, if it works more on the visual or on the placing in the writing.
yeah, that's it's hard to sort out. But either way, the pacing is definitely one of the
Either
things
way,
that I like
well
the
done
best
on
about
both.
this movie. Yeah, and I would say out of the first four movies, the third is definitely probably my favorite, and therefore probably my favorite out of the
Yeah, it's
first
definitely my
seven
favorite out of the
movies.
first four.
Yeah,
Yeah,
um,
the jury's still out, but
yeah, it's not a great movie, but it's good, which is like better than one and two. Um, yeah, I don't know if we want to bring numerical ratings into this, but
I don't think there's any reason to.
yeah,
I think
fair
it
enough.
just
I mean, it's
distracts from
it's a little bit of a
what we're
carnival game,
trying
I
to do,
guess.
which is analysis and discussion rather than
Yeah, but what if we could
for.
put the number in the clickbait title?
I mean,
Anyway,
you could
the
just do
fourth
that in the
movie.
title, and then
Yeah,
people
you're
watch,
right. You're right.
people listen to the whole podcast. Like, when are they going to talk about the score?
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And then we never talk about the
Genius.
score. And
Yeah.
they're like, okay, I guess I have to listen to the next
You put
podcast.
what you do is you put 4 out of 7 in the title, and then they think it's a score, but then they realize that's actually just my way of segueing into the fourth out of 7 movies, The Hollow Shrine. Uh,
Oh yeah.
it's the shortest of all of them. I quite like it, but it's not that good.
I would mostly agree with that. Um, it feels the shallowest as far as dialogue and exposition goes. Um, like relative to the others, obviously,
Yeah, and
right?
theme,
Like, yeah, like
which is what I would really
it's
care
just
about, right?
it's just not Nasu being Nasu, and
Yeah, which is
over-explaining
I
and
think to its
overwriting
benefit
everything.
in many ways.
I agree. I
But
agree.
also I think it's
There's a
almost
couple
like
points where it's
pendulum like on the other end where you wish it
yeah,
would go deeper, but it doesn't.
exactly.
Because I
There's
think
a couple points where
it explores very interesting concepts as far as as far as this series so far goes. Like like the first movie, like I don't know that I really care to hear more about suicide from Nasu, like you know. But on the other hand, like I'd take a couple more lines in some of these spots where it's like like talking about um, what male Shiki like choosing death, like when Shiki is
yeah,
like, death is so like scary and ominous, and yet it's like, yeah, like you could go deeper
yeah.
into that. The other thing that I said when we watched is I do kind of I would be interested. I mean, not that they're ever going to do this, but I would be interested in a bit more detail on what Kokuto was doing those 2 years. Because it's like, yeah, I mean, we would infer that he was working for Toko, but like, what is that?
Yeah, I
If
feel like it
if
would
our
probably just
recent
end
work
up being,
experience with Toko is any indication, it should have been pretty eventful, right? And like, I don't really like. It's
yeah,
not. We definitely don't want like a prequel series. Like, there's definitely no need for
yeah,
like detail in terms of what kind of cases he was solving. But in terms of his arc as a character, there's really a lot missing there because he goes from being like a relatively naive high schooler to an adult with like pretty baked in convictions. Like the convictions that he
yeah,
has don't change, but he grows like way more confident in them, I think, off screen. So it's like, all right,
yeah. I mean,
I
I
guess
think
he's
it's
an
enough
adult
to
now.
infer, seeing him,
Yeah,
right before she goes into a coma, and then seeing him after. I think there's enough. The disconnect is not so huge that you can't infer the gap, as far as development. But
yeah. I mean, like again, I'm not.
yeah,
I don't
I mean,
really
I
think they
don't
should devote
disagree entirely.
like a whole movie to it. I just
Like,
mean like a scene or two where it's
yeah,
like like
exactly.
even like a
Yeah,
montage of him like just living
I
his daily
wish
life
they
and
had
like
had
going
more.
to the
Yep.
hospital over and over, right? Like because he goes
I
like
wish it
every
had
week
been
for two
longer.
years.
Like if it had been
Yeah,
as long as the other ones with a couple Mikia scenes and just a little bit more room to talk,
yeah,
um, to like make points. I think it's a much more just impactful film.
yeah. I would say I do really like the opening scenes. Um,
Yeah, same.
Like the ambulance scene is great. It's like a really good, like just high energy straight out the gate. Um, like it feels urgent. It is like, well, there's not much I can say about it. It's an ambulance scene. I mean, come on, and a hospital scene, I guess. And then the scene immediately following it of like the really brief scene of Shiki in the void, I also like a lot. It syncs with the music really well, and there's some really beautiful and like suggestive shots. And I really
Do I
appreciate
remember
shots
that
that are
scene?
like it's like right at the beginning. Here, I can share my screen so that
Yeah.
you know exactly what I'm talking about. But like there's a really brief scene where she's like floating. Here, this is the one. Um, is this even on? Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. um, yeah, where she's in her hospital bed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then it cuts, and then she's like in presumably what is like the root or close to the root or like where people go after death. I mean, it's the fact that they don't like tell you what it is, but there's this like very suggestive
Yeah.
shot of her like floating across like a very bright horizon, and like as she obscures it, you see the shadows of lots of different bodies. I love that. I love the fact that it lasts for a moment, but it like raises a ton of questions. Not even questions really. Like it's very suggestive, right? I like that.
Yeah.
And also it's like synced. There's like a musical cue as she like obscures the light. It's great. Well done.
Yeah. Sound direction.
Yeah, who
That's
would have
fun.
thought? Somebody tell the Hiroaka directors.
Yeah, somebody find Bones.
But yeah, I guess
Yeah, I think the the other thing that I found the fourth movie kind of lacking was the the villain, in a sense.
mm,
Um,
yeah, it's like later revealed to be Araya, but like who cares, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, it just has very little impact.
Yeah, it's just kind
Like
of
I
like a
remember,
test
I
bed for
actually
her to use
remember
her
the first.
eyes.
Yeah, I actually just remember one of the few things I remember from the first time I watched it was like thinking that the bad thoughts in the hospital like were a much like not bigger deal, but they were much more like important than they kind of
Then like
actually
the
are.
well, but
Um,
oh, like in terms of the whole series.
yeah, like in terms of the whole series, but also just in terms of the film itself. Like I remember it being like because like rewatching it recently, it's really just like,
Right.
oh, it's just a test, right? Like it's this is like very
Kind of.
doable for her. Whereas the first time
Yeah.
I remember being like, oh shit, like this is like pretty powerful. This is like kind of scary for for Shiki, like for
Yeah,
Shiki.
well,
Um,
mm, sorry, go ahead.
and that like I rewatching it, I was just like, oh, it's not really threatening. It's not explained. It's just that she basically is just like the bad juju's gonna get you. Oh man, my barrier broke. The bad juju's there. Like, oh man,
Yeah, and then now they got a
maybe I should
body.
have been a little more prepared for the bad jujus. Um, and then that's it. Like
Yeah, I
I
think as
wish
as far
like
as how
I
it
get that
functions.
it's kind of something that you can assume if you're doing this kind of magical story, that it's just like, yeah, people's thoughts like coalesce into energy and like monogatari shit. But um it just feels really lacking on a rewatch
Yeah, I mean, I
as kind of
personally
the
like
main
I'm
like
very on
I
board with assuming that hospitals have bad juju. Um,
oh, I'm very on board with it too. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
My
more that it's not given enough kind of attention for me.
yeah, I mean, what I will say is that I
I
think
guess
they're a bit
I
more
might be
threatening than you're
conceding a
giving them
bit on
credit for. I think like if anything, like the main part of the movie where it's like really like I mean, not that she's in danger or anything, but like where it's like dramatically relevant. Because I think you're right as far as how they function as like a final villain of the movie or whatever, where it's like,
and
then it's
thematically
really
especially
a test to be passed. But I
like the other
think they do play a
villains.
big role in the middle of the movie when she's,
Yeah.
she's empty and like they're trying to fill her and she's like, well, I'll let them.
I'm talking more
If
from a
those
dialogue
are
and
going to
exposition
become
sense.
like my spirit, then like they can go ahead.
Yeah. And like I am talking more from a dialogue and exposition sense, like, talking about like the villain like Fujo Kirie and Asagami Fujino, like and the second one doesn't really have a true villain. But like talking about those two, like a lot of time is devoted in those movies to kind of the like thematically, and like maybe four just isn't. That's not what four is. Like four is more
Yeah,
just about Shiki's growth. Like
and I don't mind that.
that's not maybe. I think it is, but yeah, it's more the disconnect for me from the first time I watched it,
Mm,
where I remember seeing the hospital bad juju being like a lot more of a thematic focal point, and then rewatching it, just getting something different,
right.
and being a little taken aback. Um, I don't know. Maybe it was me as like a whatever 20-year-old, like just being like terrified by the idea of bad juju in hospitals because I was spending so much time around hospitals at that point.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think like the spirits are like extremely thematically relevant in a certain sense. But I agree
Well,
that
yeah,
they don't
maybe
have that
it's
much
not
weight.
relevance, but it's attention. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah,
more what I mean.
exactly. Like they're not
Like,
given that much weight by the presentation, how they're presented.
yeah, like like
Although some of the shots are
the
cool,
thoughts
I
like
will say.
come out and are like like and then Toko's just like talking about something else. Toko's just
Yeah,
like
it
arms
just kind of
folded,
shows
like
like
cigarette in mouth, just like talking about another theme. And I I this is just me kind of coming to terms with like, oh, like this isn't like one and three. It's the main, the primary, secondary, and tertiary focus is to like develop Shiki and to kind of express like what she's going through thematically with the death of Oreshiki. Um, but eh, yeah,
yeah, I mean
it's
it her
this
her
is a
loneliness
me
only
thing.
really gets a couple shots too, right? Like weirdly,
Yeah,
even though like the focus is like,
it's
oh man,
yeah,
like
it's just Toko
she's
like
empty and
explaining
she
it
just
almost the whole time.
yeah,
Um,
because the thing is, the shots that they do devote to displaying her loneliness are really good, actually. I like them a lot. Like
I
when
agree,
she walks up, she like
which
feels
is
her
why
way
I'm
over to the
upset.
window
Like
and then like has
that's
a
a big part
pained
of why
breath.
I'm upset because
Yeah,
I'm
like
like,
I really
man,
like that
like
one.
there could be more.
There's one
It
where
could be
she
better.
is like rolling around in bed and like take like again like it's really it's displayed it's conveyed mostly through like her breathing, which like I like it a lot. It's very like show don't tell.
Yeah,
But then they have like Toko coming in and telling about everything else, and it's like it kind of overshadows it
yeah.
in a way.
I that gets to the heart of what I'm talking about. It took me
Yeah.
like 30 minutes to just dance around it, or 10 minutes.
Yeah, hopefully it wasn't 30.
I
I'll
can't
check
see
in
my
while I'm
clock
editing.
right now, so
Yeah, I'll get you on that. Yeah, so I think I've
yeah,
mentioned a lot of the like well actually let's talk about the order of the story a little bit more. Um,
it's 3 2 1 4.
yeah,
We're
like
done.
I think because three should be first. I think that one's fair enough. I think one should probably be fourth. Um,
Wait,
and
did I say
then
3 2 1 4 or 3 2 4 1? I
dude, I
meant
don't
three two
fucking
four one.
know.
I agree that one should be
Three,
fourth.
two, four,
I
one.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the middle of the series is probably the best place to put kind of disconnected
Yeah. Well,
episodes
the
that
um
aren't.
3241 is chronologically speaking, it's just En Media Res, and then everything proceeds chronologically from there. With three just being transplanted out and
Yeah,
being
that's
first
true.
instead.
Yeah,
And well, and that's like I'm just helping people who are listening to just understand what's going on. Because like they're not looking at a list of the four movies and remembering which
yeah,
number corresponds to what and which number because this can easily get confusing. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's better that way. I don't think it benefits that much from being told out of order. In general, like I don't really see like there being a clear like juxtaposition or any kind of like interesting thematic comparisons that are happening from like one being next to two. Like if anything, I think just in terms of the structure of the story, I think one should probably be fourth. And the same thing goes, third. I think from a presentation sense would make a lot of sense first, but it could also just be told in order. I don't think it would be a movie series that would draw a whole lot of people in because that would mean two would be first. But hey, you could do it. Um,
yeah. I'm trying to remember 5, 6, 7, and I just can't. And I'm like,
Yeah, they're in order. I mean,
I'm not
5
gonna
is
try to
the
memorize
apartment.
those.
It's
Yeah.
Paradox Spiral. It's the apartment complex.
Yeah,
6 is
yeah. I
the
mean, I
one where
remember what
she
they
like
are.
goes
It's
to
just
boarding
I don't
school.
remember enough
Enough about them.
details
Okay, that's fair enough.
to
Yeah.
be able to like
Um,
say, "Ooh, this would work well as the last one. This would work well more in the middle. This
yeah.
would
Well,
work
those I mean,
well
I
more in
think
the
they
start."
they're already in order, and
Yeah,
I think they should stay that way. Like,
I yeah, you're probably
yeah.
right.
Um, so yeah, I don't think it makes sense to displace the order of like 2 and 4, for example. 4 should be after 2. Fair enough.
Yeah,
Um, and so like the only question really is whether 3 whether you want to start en media res by putting 3 first, or whether you just want to go pure chronological. And pure chronological, I think, is the only reason why you wouldn't do that is just because it's a little too boring at the beginning. And the
yeah.
fact that 3
Do
is
you
so good as a beginning, why not throw it at the beginning?
do you know was this the order that the novels were released in, or
Yes, the movie order is the novel order. They're the
okay,
same. Yeah.
cool. Yeah. Um, I mean, we talked about this, but one really does feel like, you know, regardless of whether it is or not, it feels to me like, you know, something written without that much planning for the rest of the series, like in place.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then
I get that impression as well.
yeah, so I'm the order is obviously very beholden to kind of that process, that trait of the first one.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I think just in terms of, imagining that you could change some things, like when we're hypothesizing about an alternate order for the story, I think we're allowing for things like, oh, well, if the first movie was really fourth, then, it would also like not be quite so cryptic, and it would like take some of that into account a little bit, but the overall like story would be the same. I mean, whatever, it's all hypothetical anyway.
Whatever. Agreed.
Yeah, so I mean, do you want to talk about moments from each movie that you liked?
Um,
Like really good scenes, if you remember any.
I mean, I obviously have things that I liked and things that I didn't like, but nothing really stands out to me as like, ooh, like that. That was particularly, notably really well done for me. Um,
That's fair. Yeah, I
there's
mean,
a
like
lot
for
that's really
me,
well done, but yeah, it's
yeah,
more that nothing really particularly stands out.
yeah, for me, one of the reasons why I like one, even though it's like not very good. I mean, I don't know that I would say I like it so much. I'm very willing to forgive one, because the scenes where it's just trying to be atmospheric and set tone, it does really well. Um,
Yeah,
like
I agree
it's
with that.
very famous for the scenes of like the Fujiwara building with Shiki taking a walk, and the people falling from it. Although we did note that there's comically no acceleration on like the person that falls through the shot. But like excluding dumb stuff like that, like obviously who cares? The opening scene with the butterfly, of course, like it's very, it sets tone. Like it, I don't know that I would say like the whole butterfly metaphor is like meaningful. But it looks cool. I can forgive it.
It's a
I like the way they do the
symbolism,
credits in these
metaphors.
movies. Like in 1 and 3, I love the credit rolls. Um, it's just I don't know. I have a soft spot for like
Wait,
the black
I'm
on
trying to
white
think what.
credits, like flashing, especially because it in both cases it's synced to the music. Um, where they have like a shot and then they have a white. They fade to
Oh,
white and there's credits,
the
and then they
opening
have another
credits,
shot
the
and then the
opening
white. Yeah, the
credits.
opening
Okay.
credits. Sorry,
I
yeah,
was like, wait, are
yeah.
the end credits different?
Yeah, and then of
I
course
thought they were all the
there's
same.
yeah, there's the scene that's not at the beginning, but where she discovers another body, where there's like the dog walking through the pool of blood, and like
Yeah.
again, the sound direction is on point. The song has a music. There's like a change in the song. I mean, it's like a drop almost. It's violins, shrill violins.
Crescendo. That's not a crescendo.
No, it's not a crescendo, but yeah, I
That's
mean,
just a word that I know in music theory.
yeah, like it's timed so that as the bloody footprints of the dog appear in the shot, like the music changes. Like it's simple stuff, but it makes a big difference.
Quick, hey, quick, write that down.
Yeah, Bones, you listening? Bones.
Yeah, I'm doing an impression of the directors of Hiraka.
um, Yeah, and then there's another scene in the first movie that is sometimes talked about, and I'm remembering this just because I think Digi talked about it at one point. Is the scene where she eats the ice cream with only one arm. Um,
Yeah,
and again, that's another scene. We can talk about the scene itself in a second, but that's another scene that I think actually would like seriously benefit from context. Like the fact that she
yeah,
is like all tsundere about eating the ice cream, and then like in the middle of the movie she like gets it out and like kind of forces herself to eat it. Like would be really meaningful if you like knew who these people were.
yeah. That
But
would probably be
your
one of my
first time
favorite
through, it's
moments
just
if
like,
it was
oh, she's
if it
eating
was
ice
third or
cream.
fourth. Yeah,
Like she
it's like,
said
oh,
she
she
wouldn't
doesn't
eat
have
it,
an
but now
arm,
she's eating it. I wonder why.
and then you're like, oh, she only has one
Yeah,
arm.
she's
Ooh.
missing an arm.
And then
I
like the
wonder what
scene
that
just becomes
symbolizes in the
about her
context of
eating
this
while
movie.
missing an arm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that like it's a well done scene in the sense that like it's a
Oh, certainly.
long like shot from like kind of a weird angle. It's her like struggling with no music, just struggling with like doing a very mundane thing. I think the shot works very well, and of course like I remember Digi saying that she really really liked this movie, um, like for that scene basically, because it
Yeah.
resonated with her a lot. Um, and like I don't know that I agree necessarily because I haven't had an experience like that, but like I absolutely
Wait,
appreciate like
you
how
haven't
good.
lost an arm?
I know, right? Um, yeah, like I can appreciate how like just having good scenes like that can add so much value to a movie. Like even
I
if
also
they're
eat
totally
ice cream.
divorced from context. I mean, like think about it. Like when somebody like raves about that scene, like oh man, like it's such a good portrayal of what it's like to have your your everyday like ability to do mundane things like suddenly reduced. It's like well yeah, I mean like having great scenes in your movie like can make it really good even if those scenes like don't make the thematic sense that they're supposed to make.
Yeah, like not everything has to contribute 100% to the overarching theme.
Yeah, although that scene kind of
It
does, and it's
does,
supposed to.
certainly.
Like it's supposed to
Yeah,
be like she's
but
missing
I
an
don't.
arm because Kokuto is unconscious. Simplism. But yeah, I mean like it it would have more impact. But even without it, because the scene is really well done, I appreciate the craftsmanship of it. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I also like the opening sequence of the third movie a lot. I can't really speak to the rape scene. Like, I don't know if the movie could do without it. It's very much like
Is
Nasu
that not
Bingo.
the opening sequence?
Well, I mean like everything after that because
Okay.
it's relatively
Okay.
short. Like in terms of like the
Yeah.
shots, right?
Yeah.
It's like three
Yeah.
shots, 3 or 4 shots, and then the rest of the opening
And it
sequence
takes up like less than 30
is
seconds, I think.
yeah is like a great piece by Kaji Yuki that is like you know. Again, I'm not very equipped to talk about music, but I like it a lot, and it fits really well, and it's timed to like the credit fades, which I really like. And I also like the third movie has some of the best background work and character art in the series. Like there's a couple of shots like her like moving her like Fujino walking in a crowd with like a shadow over her face. She's just like really well drawn in that scene, you know. Um, and like for example, right after she breaks the bridge, like there's another scene where like it's really noticeable actually. It's almost jarring where like suddenly she's just drawn like way better. um,
Huh.
but
I
that's
actually
another thing
don't
that I
remember
appreciate
noticing
that
that.
about that movie is that like the art is actually like really they put a lot of time into it. Here I can show you that one in particular.
Money shots.
Yeah, but it's crazy because the movie like looks good generally. So the fact that there are also like money shots in it is pretty great. Um,
Hey, here.
Although that is kind of a UFO table thing, I guess, because there's not like incredible cuts where it's like this animation took the whole budget. It's more like just a lot of good
Yeah.
background art. And background art is something that this series consistently does very well. So we'll give it that. And in four, I've already mentioned this, but yeah, the scenes I really like in four are again the opening scene, like everything up until like I guess the end of the song that is like the opening song. Really like that. Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about like episodic versus vignette, like whether we think it is episodic versus a series of vignettes, and whether it should be, or the what the effect is of each. If you want to, we don't have to.
I mean, the first four definitely feel more like a series of vignettes. I don't know how relevant it is. Like, I don't know how much it matters.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, like I would say like 2 and 4 are absolutely like episodic. I would not call them vignettes really. But 1 and 3 are pretty close to being vignettes. Um, but it's kind of an academic distinction, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. 1 and 3 kind of dominate the first four for me. Like 1 and 3
yeah, I
feel
mean, I
like
think the fact that they're more
3 of the first
isolated
4 movies.
means that they like took more time to give them their own like flair. If that kind of makes sense. Like
Yeah.
that was kind of a weird laugh, sorry, but like 2 and 4 seem like very preoccupied with getting certain plot details across, excuse me, and like as a result, it's like like
Yeah.
there's not much left. Um, like
Two
especially on
seems
a
very
rewatch, they feel
preoccupied
kind of
with
empty.
being as slow as it possibly can.
Yeah. But talking about speaking of rewatches, let's get into the real meat, and I think the real like often off-cited reason for why people like or do not like Kara no Kyokai, and that is like does the theme, the philosophy, quote unquote, make any sense? Like, because the first movie like it has some symbolism in service of like the character arc, like the ice cream thing, the like her being without an arm, like, that's absolutely just her um, missing Kokuto, obviously. But you know, in terms of like the characters talking about suicide, like is that relevant to like the series? What the series is trying to say as a whole? Is the series so far trying to say anything as a whole? Because like Kara no Kyokai as a title basically just is like a way of saying death, like you know,
Yeah.
like boundary of emptiness. Like that's the boundary between life and death, or the boundary between existence and non-existence, I should say, is death.
The Garden of Sinners.
Yeah, the Garden of Sinners is dumb. Like, God damn it, Nasu, with your English, get the fuck out of here.
Was that him,
Um,
or was that just like
yeah,
the
that's the
licensing?
novel subtitle as well.
Ah,
Yeah,
there you go.
it's weird that it's become like the standard name for it in English because it's like a subtitle. It's not a
Yeah, it's the name
translation.
that I
Like
always hear.
that's
Yeah.
also one of its names in Japanese. So it's weird that that's just like,
Yeah.
oh well, there's an English part of the title, we'll use that. I mean, to be fair, if they called it Boundary of Emptiness, would be extremely edgy. But that's okay because that's also
Yeah.
the case in Japanese. You can't mask the edginess. Don't even try. But yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
like you
you
would
could
expect that
just
the
call it
series would have.
the
Sorry, go
edge
ahead.
and just
Oh, the
instead of
edge of
boundary,
edge.
just edge. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. See, if you're aware
Just
of it, then it's
lean all the
fine.
way into it. Yeah.
If you're self-aware, then like everything can be forgiven.
Yeah,
That's a joke.
like
That's a joke.
when Mikia says that it's a cheap novel.
Yeah, see, exactly. Yeah, if you write a cheap novel and then you have one of the characters say like, "That's this whole thing sounds like it's from a cheap novel," then actually it makes your story good.
It's magic switch.
But yeah, I mean, from a series
Cut
whose
that.
title is about the boundary between existence and non-existence, boundary of emptiness or nothingness.
Yeah, I don't think the title is like needlessly edgy.
You would no,
or like,
sorry,
oh,
I'm changing the topic by saying this. You would expect it to have something
ah,
interesting to say about death, right?
yes.
The question is, does it? I so far do not think so. Unfortunately, I really want it to
Yeah.
because there's a lot of visual flair, and if the visual flair was accompanied by themes, it would have a lot of impact because, like obviously the whole point of making a movie out of it is that the visuals are kind of a driving force that gets something across. And I think that they absolutely have that power. If there was something there, they would totally be able to do that. But as it is, it doesn't really feel like there's a really like coherent, overarching message. Like
Yeah, I think 1 and 3 feel the most disconnected from that, and maybe that's part of the vignette
yeah,
deal.
they
Um,
have kind of their own things that they're
it's
talking about,
yeah,
right?
it doesn't. I mean, it ties in, but it doesn't really fit in
They tie in
to
plot
the
wise, but
larger
not really
thematic.
thematically.
Yeah, like it ties in the sense that like suicide is death, but like all of the things that they say about suicide don't really have anything like have any major like influence on, or don't have any major like connections to ideas about death, especially the other ideas about death that the series presents.
Yeah, nor are the things that they say about suicide like especially interesting philosophically speaking. I
Yeah,
mean, like again, like Miki's conversation, like yeah, I mean, like that's a like it's honestly more of an ethics conversation than a conversation about death, right?
yeah, like I gotta be honest, I don't remember a lot of the specific like themes that Toko was talking about in 4 because I remember it all being incredibly basic.
Yeah, I
Like
mean, I think
just like
in
oh
general
like
throughout the whole series, it's hard to
he's dead
remember
so
all of
now
them.
he's gone and like now you're alone.
Well, yeah, I mean, like it's not theme. Like she's explaining the
Yeah.
plot. And I think a lot of the like difficulty that I have with piecing together what's happening is like, oh man, like I can't really remember what they were talking about like verbatim or exactly, right? So I can't do a close reading without going back and watching them again. And I think the reason for that is just that it's not themes, right? And this is like something that
Yeah.
I kind of was thinking while we were watching it. Like ultimately, like it would be much easier to remember them if they were actually connected to one another. Like the fact that you can't remember them is a sign. Like if it was all in service of something that made sense, then you could connect it all, and that would like have a positive effect on recollection. Like for
Yeah.
example in Mirai Fukuin, which like I actually can keep it all straight, and I can think about how everything works together towards a singular goal. Look forward to that one. Um, but yeah, I mean, as far as like taking these movies as four, it's hard to say that they have a whole lot that they're doing other than the plot, right? Like it's almost like the themes are more or less in service of the plot and not the other way around is how it feels. And I hesitate to even say themes, right? Like the monologuing and like you know
The
musings are in
message
service of the
of
plot.
each. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's fair to say that when they do have things to say, they're disconnected. Like it's on an episode by episode basis,
And
which is
even
not
sometimes
necessarily a bad thing. But
passage
some
by passage basis.
right, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like the Fujino thing felt particularly like kind of all over the place.
yeah. I mean, the closest
Like
thing that
it was
that
unified by pain, but like their discussions of pain just felt like they were
yeah,
starting and
it
ending
feels very
at
Nasu to
just
me
completely
in that
different.
sense
Yeah,
because it's
yeah,
all
super Nasu.
connected. Like they're using the same word a lot, but it's not
But
actually a
they
discussion
don't
of a
really
like.
fit in.
There's no
Yeah,
unifying
they don't fit
concept.
into yeah,
Right,
exactly.
like the fact that like I think a really good example is like Kokuto's what he said. I was gonna say monologue, but it's not that long. Like what he says at the end about Fujino when he's like, I don't really care how those gang rapists died, like but like for her, like she knows that like murder is wrong, and she'll have to like carry that wound with her forever. It'll continue hurting, right? And it's like okay, like nice wordplay, but also like that's
Yeah,
not a real like connection, right? Like it's a very like superficial way to like tie everything together, and it feels very cool. Like when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, like oh man, there it is, itai. Oh yeah, pff, there you go. But wordplay ultimately is not philosophy, right? So,
yeah.
and like how can I say wordplay and the third movie without mentioning the sequence where Fujino is like, oh, motto omotte itai, motto
Yeah,
koku ni itai. It's like,
yeah.
well, all right, I mean,
And then she's like, Itai.
yeah, it's like, all right, I mean, sure, wordplay, but
Yeah,
again, it's not meaningful. Like,
yeah. I believe
what am I supposed to take away
the
from that? That
translation.
like
Yeah, the translation
wanting
of the sub.
things is also pain. Like, is that the Japanese language wordplay philosophy?
Oh yeah. Um, the English, the translation in the sub that we watched, I remember just not like
Oh, it didn't
just
capture it
translating
at
that
all.
literally.
I mean,
Yeah,
which is fine,
didn't
but
capture it in any
yeah.
sense.
Like I think wordplay is like fun and cool sometimes. But if it's all you have, then it's like, oh, okay, well,
Yeah.
please get a bit
It's
more
like
substance.
what's your theme? Like what's your point? My point is like
I came up with
Itai
a
is
bunch of
also
different things.
Itai.
Yeah,
Like
like
it's like
look at all
oh
these different
shit,
discussions that all use the same word. That's
that's a great
connection,
idea.
baby.
We got you, Nasu. We'll build a whole movie around this.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, because again, I like a lot of things about these movies. I wish there was more to it, but it really it doesn't feel like there is.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to accept as kind of an amateur, like, this was early Nasu. This was Nasu kind of figuring himself out. even though it doesn't sound like it gets that much better. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I
it's
think
just pretty. It's
success
pretty
was not
brief.
kind to him as a creative. Like, I'm sure it was kind to him financially, but I mean, like, in terms of his creative development, I don't think it did him any favors.
Yeah.
No offense to him, I guess. I don't know. I'm sure
Yeah.
he's fine with where he
Yeah.
is.
No
But I
offense meant to
personally, I just
Matsu,
don't think that
but
his
it's just
work has ever been like anything like truly great, and you know, that probably has something to do with the fact that he got financially
I
rewarded
I would
massively
use
for
the word
stuff that,
transcendent.
yeah, well, that's, yeah, fair enough, fair enough. The fact that he got financially, like, massive financial rewards for doing stuff that is pretty standard as far as anime writing goes, just like on a
Yeah.
bigger scale. But I mean, that's beside
Like,
the point. Like, he
think
can do what he
about it.
wants.
The idea of heroes throughout history coming together to fight each other for the Holy Grail. It's so cool.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I don't even know what I'm making fun of when I do that thing anymore. It's just I've run into so many corners.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so as far as final verdict goes, yeah, I would agree. It feels very amateur, and as far as amateur writing goes, it's like, all right, like
Yeah,
there's nothing like glaringly wrong with
like
it.
it's
But the problem is,
what
it's
I was saying
paired with
was
movie making that is by no means amateur. Like
yeah,
the craft and like artistry that goes into making the movie part of like the adaptation is really good. It's much better than I think the writing deserves.
disregarding the last few scenes and the last few cuts of two.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
But you're gonna get that with any, like, anime anything is an extremely collaborative effort. So there's always going to be like
yeah,
some points where it's like, huh?
this
Just
is
because a lot of
technically
people make
AV.
it. Yeah.
Um, I can't think of anything else that I really have to add.
Yeah. I mean, I think as much as there is to talk about, the verdict is ultimately pretty simple,
Yeah,
right? Like,
like we could just go on for hours about specific things and how it
oh,
feels
we
and
already
how it
have.
feels. I know. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we could go on for more hours,
But yeah, we'll leave it
but
at that.
it kind of
Kado no
doesn't
Kyokai, first
extend.
four movies, pretty mediocre rating. Great adaptation though.
4 out of 7.
The callback. Now this
Four,
guy, he's doing themes.
four, four, 4 out of 7. Perfect score.
Yep. All right. Well, look forward to the next episode, which is going to be the rest of the movies,
Don't
including Mirai
don't look
Fukuin.
for it.
And then also
You
after
should be
that,
looking
look forward
backwards.
to the episode on the thing that we've been offhand trashing, the Hiroaka anime. All right.
Yeah, don't look forward to that either. Look backwards. Just keep looking backwards. Never look forwards.